All right, so today's our first Zoom meeting. Thank you all again for joining us. We're not going to necessarily do like individual introductions per se, but you did have a chance in the discussion board to introduce yourself. A few of you have already posted there, so thank you so much for your initial post. And then the second part of that discussion assignment is a reply to your classmates. We will break out into breakout rooms in a little bit. And I have a question that I'd like you to consider as you work in the breakout room. You didn't need to do any research or studying prior to this question that I have for you. So no need to worry if you're just getting started with our textbook. And I didn't have the textbook, going over the textbook with the class today in mind in the schedule, but I'd be glad to have us take a look at that as well.
Let me guess, because the textbook is already downloaded online free for us to use for kind of assignment, right?
Correct. So thank you, Joshua. The online textbook is free and accessible. You have a couple of different ways to access the textbook. You can either utilize a PDF. You can access it online via the website, OpenStax. I also have it integrated into our course, our Canvas course, in a couple of different ways. One is the whole textbook is integrated chapter by chapter. And then as I open up the modules as well, it will usually be integrated there. So you have a number of different access points for the textbook. I hope that since it's a free online textbook, that was helpful as well. I feel that particular textbook does a great job in covering, similar to other US history textbooks I used, in covering kind of the big picture of US history part 1, which is the focus of our course. It's not going to go into great detail and certain events, certain individuals, certain things that happen in US history. So we'll fill in some of the gaps there. And then what you'll do this semester is you'll write a essay about US history, and that will be your opportunity to really dive into a particular topic that you're interested in. So one of the things I'll talk about today is the essay assignment. And it's week 1, but since we have the full class of 16 weeks, we're going to spread out the assignment. It's going to be broken up into multiple parts, and I'll share with you today the prompt for the essay assignment and talk a little bit about that. So let me go over the schedule really quickly, and then I'll pause and I'll see if anyone has any initial questions or comments. And I've been going back and forth with you all about the Zoom schedule. I want to say thank you all for working with me. So definitely by week 4, it should be the regular time scheduled for the class, which would be 10 a.m. We're going to meet on Tuesdays. It'll be once a week. Then that Thursday time period, essentially, you'll work on your own. So that will be your opportunity to work.
I'm not gonna lie.
Secrets.
I saw some of the times you put on the survey. I'm like, 6 o'clock, man. I'm sorry, but I don't want to be doing school that late.
Thank you, Josh. I totally understand. Thank you for your for your input on that. Those were kind of initially the times that worked for my schedule too, but a lot of the feedback I got from the class was, hey, we signed up for this class because it was a morning class. Like it works well with our schedule. So there's also inquiries about if I don't make it to the meetings, will I get dropped from the class, etc. You won't get dropped, but this is one way in which you can participate in the class. And so if you look in the course syllabus, I do check your participation, whether that's through your logging in, through your submitting assignments, and through the Zoom meetings. And I think it just really gives us a good opportunity to get together and go over kind of how you guys are interjecting right now with some of the questions, whether that's the course, like the way we're running the course, or the information that we're going over in the class. So
I have a question. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh no, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to, you just mentioned, you said by week 4, we should be back on track.
Yeah.
So from here till then, we're just going to take it by the week.
I think I'm just gonna probably, I had it open, think, wanting to try to accommodate everybody. It just, by that point, I think it just got a little too, there's too many different options. So we'll probably just keep this time. This right now for these first few weeks, that's the best time for me as well. And if you're unable to make it like next week or the following week, just check out the videos, try to join us back in. I don't want to give anybody a hard time if they can't make it every week. I understand things come up, but I really appreciate if you can join us. So if you can't, because of the time period, the schedule, if you're unable to make it because it's off, I totally understand, because it's kind of like I'm throwing you a curveball, right? When you signed up for the class, you're under the assumption it's at 10 o'clock. So I, just to answer your question, Benjamin, I didn't, I'm sorry, was it Benjamin or was it? Who
Yeah.
was asked? Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't confirm a time, but I think just to make a decision and move on. So you can either try to join us or you just can't. We'll probably keep it at this time for the first few weeks. And then, like I said, by, let me double check that. It's either going to be week 3 or week 4. Let me see here. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, by week 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So
And then only on Tuesdays, right?
it'll only be on Tuesdays. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I probably like you all, I have another source of employment, so to speak, that I generally work. So I was able to modify my schedule to get Tuesdays off so I could, be here with the class. And I think it's just something important and just a good time for us to, work together. That's one of my goals for our online Zoom meetings. And I know for the survey, you all indicated some important things that you want to do. So I really want to try to see if I can meet some of those goals as well. Can I answer any other questions before we move forward? Feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat.
Professor, unfortunately, I have a limited amount of time. Do you know exactly, because I'm working right now. I'm thankfully on my break. And do you know how much longer, if anything will be discussed about the homework we're assigned? Because I think my break for work ends around 55.
55. Okay.
Yes.
Did you have a specific question about like the discussion assignment for this week, or is it just like you're just
I apologize. If we're just gonna go over it, of course, right now. Sorry.
Yeah, I can go over it with you. Let me stop sharing my screen and we'll take a look at the discussion assignment, which is the assignment that is that we're working on right now. So thank you
so much.
You got it. No worries. Let me go ahead and pull that up. And so this is, I'm sure if this is your first online class, you'll notice that a lot of the instructors, we have these icebreaker assignments. This is one that I've used quite a bit, and I think it can probably use a little bit of updating at this point, but let me go ahead and share so we can take a look at the assignment. So the couple important things is one, I'll usually try to indicate here. Can everybody see the discussion assignment?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Before I talk for like 5 minutes and everybody's like, hey, what happened? You can take a look at the rubric and this will show you how the assignment's being scored here. And actually it should be 50 points. So it'll just be double this. I apologize. And so it'll be 30 points and 20 points for the rubric. So let me update that for the class. But the first part is that you're answering a few questions about yourself, your background, how long have you been here at Southwestern College? What is your goal here at Southwestern College? I'd like you to take a look at the contents of the textbook, the table of contents, what's like drawing your interest like initially. Share one piece of non-academic information about yourself. So I'll share one thing about myself. For instance, I'm a big music fan, so I have turntables, I have records, and I need to definitely reconnect those and get back on them, but it's been a while, but just something I like to do in any spare time that I might have. And then I asked you a couple of questions about the historical thinking videos and the why study history. That's going to be in our module 1. There's some tabs and you're going to take a look at each of those tabs and it'll have that content there. And One other important thing to consider is for questions 2 through 5, I'm asking you to write, approximately 3 sentences or longer, just so you can go into a little bit more detail. Your first post would be due by today. For this first assignment, if you're a little behind and you need a little bit extra time to post by tomorrow, I don't have a problem with that. And then by Sunday, you'll reply to your classmates. You'll also note that I do put the due date as today. I do put the due date as today so that it kind of notifies you to get the first part of the assignment done.
I have a question.
Sure.
I don't know why for the assignments they come out as locked.
I'm sorry, it comes out as what? I'm sorry.
That about the assignments, they come out as they show on my Canvas locked.
It's showing locked. Did you go through the
Yes.
did you go through the first module, the course orientation module as well? Do you know if you
No.
did that? Okay, so there's a prerequisite set, so that means you have to look at that first course orientation module. Then once you do that, it should open up for you. If you're still having problems, let me know. And you know what? Let me go ahead and reset it right now so that there's no kind of prerequisite, so that you
Okay.
you should
thank
not have any
you.
problems with it. Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Thank you.
I had another student who told me he was unable to see anything, and so I didn't hear from anybody else. So I was hoping that was like a unique situation, but let's see here. You do that and then for week 1. Let's see. Okay. Let me reload it.
Okay, I
and
can
then,
see them. They're unlocked already.
all right, awesome.
Thank
And
you.
who am I speaking with?
Kareli.
Kareli. Thank you, Kareli. Appreciate it for
You're
letting me know about that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other issues with access that I can address before anybody else have any problems? Hopefully by now, just accessing it, reloading it. Do me a favor. Tell me if you're accessing the course mainly through your phone or through a PC in the chat. And I just want to see what the kind of overwhelming response is, because I'm generally on my PC, but I'm starting to use the phone more because I know a lot of people are using the phone. Okay, we got a few PCs, so that's good. Cool. PC and phone. Okay. Just for the controls and everything and for view, it's definitely easier for me as an instructor to be on the PC, but when I'm on the go, or sometimes I receive messages from you all, then I'll definitely be on the phone and use the app. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing, go back to the presentation. And I know some of you said that you could join for like the first half. No worries. Whenever you have to leave, you're all good to go. All right, so we'll take a look at the course syllabus. And am I sharing the PowerPoint class?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. I just want to talk a little bit about myself. That's something that I'm sometimes pretty good at, but I won't go on too far. But I just want to kind of relate to you all and let you know that I've been in a similar situation. I come from the community college system as well. I'm originally from Central California, which is up kind of between Fresno and Modesto. So if you know that part of California, you probably know about it. If you don't, you're probably like, I don't know where that's at, but it is the home of the 10th University of California. So if you're looking for an entrance into the UC system, it's an option. It's a lot different probably from living in San Diego County or Southern California, but it's just a different kind of experience there. But at the community college level, like yourself, I was balancing work, school, family, helping out mom at home. And I had the opportunity to transfer to Cal State Long Beach. So if anyone's, looking at a state school, that's a great option for you, just like San Diego State as well. And then I made my way down to UC San Diego, and was able to get in there, finished up, and then I was lucky enough to start working at Southwestern College. And so my main area is online teaching, and just like you all, kind of getting thrusted into the COVID situation, COVID-19 and the pandemic. I was already teaching online, fortunately, but definitely had to continue to grow and try to help meet, the needs of our community and everything that was going on. So if anyone ever has any questions about, about just the academic side outside of history class, any questions about that, I'd be glad to just like share my experience and let you know how things went for myself. Because
Okay,
I'm sure some of you might be on the same path.
excuse me. I have a question.
Sure.
Even though we already got the COVID vaccine, save us and keep us alive and immune. Even though we're vaccine, how many variants or versions of the coronavirus are there out in the world?
That's an excellent question. I'm primarily am hearing mostly about the Delta variant. It seems like there's like new information coming out every day regarding, the issue of being vaccinated and the ability to either transmit or not transmit. I don't know the latest on all of that. Here at Southwestern College, the decision was made to ask everyone to be vaccinated on campus, students coming back. So I'm sure you got, notified about that. So I think every school is taking a different approach, like K through 12, for instance. Some schools are testing. I'm not sure what they're doing in like this, some of the K through 12 schools in your area or your neighborhood, but it's definitely a concern just with the issues going on. And I'm probably not as well informed to kind of speak on all the different variants, but it's still something that's concerning to a lot of people, and we still have a lot of time to go, I guess, experiences and deal with the scenarios that we're dealing with. So I kind of just keep my ear open on the news or the radio, listening to what's going on, and then try to make the best informed decision as possible. But I'm sure just if this is your first semester, you have the option to go take classes on campus and then online. I'm sure online is still the preferred process, but last year, we got pushed into all online. So some of you might have had experience with that as well. Just one other thing I wanted to talk about relating to like my academic path is why history. And one of the things that really, there's all these different stories about, local history, whether that's things that happen in Chula Vista or in San Diego or along the US-Mexico border, the history of the Southwest, the history of the state of California. So I think local history is super, and like localized hyper history is super interesting. So that's kind of what drew me to some of these stories. What I'm sharing with you here is a couple of images that relate to a historical character named Joaquin Murrieta, and there's a lot of debate about whether he existed or didn't exist. There's even arguments that there was like 5 different Joaquins doing different things across California. This is post gold rush era, so after the 1850s, in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas and throughout the valley of California, Central California. But the idea of Joaquin Murrieta is that he was a bandito, so to speak, and there's also like a racial element of him being of Mexican descent. The myth goes that they killed his brother, and they raped one of his family members, and he fought back, and he ended up becoming an outlaw due to this experience. Now, the second image at the top, the gentleman holding the head, is supposedly the embalmed head of Joaquin Murrieta. And so there's another kind of additional layer to the story. But I just wanted to share with you one of the stories that got me interested in the history. And it's really thinking about the story. So I'm going to ask you all this semester to think about the stories, think about the people, think about something that draws your attention, whether that's Native American history, military history, Mexican American history, African American history, all of these different components that relate to the US historical experience. And within that list of potential topics, select one that you want to run with and go the distance for the semester and research, investigate, analyze, and then produce a written document about it. And thinking about just how this class or history in general might help you beyond the major. Like, do I have any history majors in the class? I'm gonna guess no, but maybe someone's gonna prove me wrong. I didn't get any yeses, so I'm assuming no, right? So a lot of you are taking this class as a requirement. So this class can help you in a number of different ways with critical thinking, academic writing, research, comparative analysis. These are some of the tools and techniques that you'll utilize as a historian in our class. Investigating and digging deeper. And one of the primary ways we'll do that will be through primary sources and secondary sources. So we'll definitely talk about some of that this semester. Can I answer any questions just about those final couple slides? Does anyone have anything they wanted to share before we move on to the next part of today's schedule? So hopefully by now you've had an opportunity to go over the course syllabus. You're probably concerned about the grading, the attendance and participation, the assignments, the course and college policies that are listed in the syllabus. And so we have in our course syllabus, in our course as a whole, there's 1,000 points possible. There's three components to the course in regards to your assignments, which are the discussions, the knowledge checks, and the essay assignment. And what I've done for the essay assignment is I've broken it into a number of various steps to help you work towards creating the final draft, which is draft number 2. For attendance and participation, as I mentioned, I'll be looking at your time spent on Canvas, your submission of assignments, and then if you can join us for the Zoom meetings, that's another additional way that you can participate with the class. And then the course and college policies are really related to, one of them is going to deal with plagiarism, and that's something that we're going to talk about this semester and ways to avoid that, right? If I'm talking about plagiarism, how are you going to define plagiarism? How would you define plagiarism, class? What is your definition of plagiarism?
To me, plagiarism is basically just copying someone else's work without citing it, or just plain right, just stealing from them.
Yeah, it has to do with the way that you're presenting information. So if you're doing a discussion,
if you want, I don't mind.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Does someone else want to share their definition? Anthony in the chat says no credibility to the owner. So you're not giving any indication of who wrote that information. So say for instance, you're doing a discussion assignment, you use the textbook, you take information word for word, and then use that in your discussion without distinguishing that it was drawn from the textbook. Technically, that's considered plagiarism, right? But what we want to do as instructors is we want to help you learn how to properly utilize that information so that you avoid any kind of instances of plagiarism. And I think the biggest challenge is, how do you put this information into your own words, right? What are some of the methods that you can utilize as a writer to put information into your own words? And one of the ways is paraphrasing. Of course, you can directly quote. Josh mentioned that you can use that information, but you have to give credit. You have to properly cite it, right? You have to give credit to the author.
Can I say something else?
Sure.
In all honesty, 90% of the time, most people don't, in writing, most people don't mean to plagiarize. It's always an accident because they either forgot to cite or they couldn't find the site. So So you
I-
can't put someone under the bus real quick right away, right?
I think that's a great way to look at it. And I think especially as an instructor, I've tried to adapt more to that viewpoint, because if we're not providing you the tools to correctly integrate citations into your work, then we're not helping the process. We're not facilitating the process of research writing and citation. So that's going to be something you'll hear me talk about a lot. If you're wanting more detail, more definition, please reach out and I'll be glad to, like, if we need to meet on a one-on-one basis or come stop by my office hours, I'll be glad to go into more detail. But those are some of the things that I thought would be helpful for going over on the course syllabus. And so when you have an opportunity, please take a look at it. Right now, why don't we just take a little quick break, a little 5-minute break, get up, stretch, whatever you like to do. Let me see what time it is right now. So it's 3 o'clock. Let's rejoin at like 3:06, 3:07. We'll come back. Then we're going to go into, I'm going to have a question for you all, and we're going to go into breakout rooms. We're going to have you discuss the question. We'll come back and hear what you have to say, and then we'll kind of recap and wrap it up for the day. So thank you all. I'll see you in about 6-7 minutes, okay? Thank you. All right, class, thank you all for, hope your break was good. A couple minutes just to stretch or get something to drink or whatever the case may be. But the next second part of the Zoom meeting today, I wanted to, let me make sure I'm sharing the right item with y'all. All right, so imagine this scenario, right? You've just been assigned an essay and you can choose the topic. I have a couple students here that look a little less than happy to be assigned this essay, so I'm sure you can understand the emotion behind it, right? You just hear the word essay, like means a lot of reading, a lot of writing, etc. And it does involve those steps. And hopefully, as I mentioned, my goal with breaking up the assignment was to help you incrementally kind of scaffold and build up to the grand finale, which is the draft, the final draft, or draft 2 is what I'm calling it.
Hi, Jules.
The criteria is that it must be an individual or an event that lived or took place prior to 1870, and it should be part of U.S. history. If it's related to Canadian history or Mexican history, but dealing with U.S. history or another country, there's some wiggle room, definitely some wiggle room there, right? But that gives you an indication of what the essay prompt will ask you to do. It'll ask you to select a topic and to write about this topic. So what I'd like us to do right now in the breakout rooms is, let's consider this question in our breakout rooms. I'd like you to assign someone to write down some of the ideas. Potential topics is what we're focusing on. It should be anything dealing with U.S. history prior to 1870, right? And then we'll regroup and share with the class what some of the ideas that we had about the topic were. So let me go ahead and as I mentioned, they don't have to necessarily assign. Maybe you can ask somebody to volunteer and see if they're interested in writing down some ideas. So we're going to have, it should be about 4 people per breakout room. Again, if you want to just note that you're thinking about topics that deal with U.S. history prior to 1870. I mean, if you need to just do some quick searches while you're in the breakout room, that's totally awesome as well. Introduce yourself if you just as an icebreaker. Let's see how it goes with the breakout rooms. And then how many minutes do you think we're going to need for this exercise? I'd say
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go for it.
I would say maybe 10, 15 minutes stretching it, but mostly 10.
Okay, let's start with 10. And then if we need some additional time, we can always add some more time on there. I'll probably be going back and forth between the groups just to see, how things are going. And just think about what you've learned about US history up to that point. So we're talking about right after the Civil War. So anything that you're familiar with that's happened in US history prior to that could be a potential topic. It can also be topics that deal with, like, say, for instance, the state of California. It was Native American land, right? Native American land. Then European settlers came in, colonized the region in various forms and fashion. The Spanish had a presence in California and eventually became part of Mexico, later part of the United States. Or you could think about somewhere like Texas, which had a little bit different history. So, or the East Coast, which of course, beginning with the colonies, etc. So those might be some potential, just, right off the top of your head topics. Okay, so let me create the breakout rooms. I'll open up all the rooms, and then let's see if it's gonna just assign you directly to the room. Let me see what my options are. So we'll put it at 10 minutes. And it's gonna move you to the breakout room right now. And yeah, I'll try to stop by and see if I can chat with y'all, okay? See you in a few. All right, we're almost all back to the main room. Welcome back. Thank you for participating in the breakout room. Welcome back, everyone. I got a chance to stop by all the breakout rooms, and I saw you were all checking out some interesting topics. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say, and I'd like you to share with the class, if you don't mind. This kind of gives us a master list here of some potential topics, and maybe some classmates in one room might be interested in some of the topics that you've come up with. So first, I'm going to start with room 1, which was Daniel, Joshua, and Luis. What did you all think about that potential topic for your essay assignment? What were some of the ideas you had about that?
Can I say?
Sure.
Oh, my partner Luis talked about the railroads being built, the ones leading to each other, and he also talked about the gold rush.
Yeah, those are great examples of some monumental developments in U.S. history, and in particular, well, the railroads for transportation, right? That's essential. Being able to travel long distance now in a much shorter time period. The transportation revolution, the steamboat, the railroads, these things, and then later on, more in a more modern era, the automobile. Think about how reliant we are on those systems. So those are great examples. The gold rush in particular in California history is really phenomenal, really monumental, and changing
Good job, Luis.
the nature of the state. Yeah. So I think those are some good examples. Did you have any other topics that you thought about room 1? Or were those kind of the main?
I also said the Civil War and the Lincoln assassination.
Yeah, those are going to be right at the tail end, right? Oh, let me go back to the whiteboard. Sorry. Give me one moment. Go. Whiteboard. Okay. Thank you, room 1. I appreciate. Can everyone see the whiteboard? Yeah. Room 2, would you all mind sharing with us your some of the topics that you all discussed? That was Alexia, Benjamin, Elliot, and Isaac.
I'm looking into some right now. I was actually looking more at characters to see.
Okay. Yeah.
I was trying to find some interesting characters that I could like find some events through. I don't know, just follow their lives, see what they did. I found one, Wild Bill Hickok. So I was looking more into the West, the state of the West in those times around 1870. See how the West was looking around there, or the Wild West at that time. Also found the Great Chicago Fire, which I'd never heard of before, so I was making some reading about that. Seems a little interesting.
No, those are great examples, and I think it kind of leads you to, you talked about Wild Bill, and then thinking about the Wild West, and then we can go into other themes that can be either expanded on or boiled down on. So like it made me think of Western expansion.
I also found this guy called Martin Robinson Delaney. He was a anti-slavery activist, and he was the first African American admitted to Harvard Medical School. So that's pretty interesting.
Those are some great examples. And so you can just like, for instance, was it Isaac, right? Isaac, you're sharing, right? As Isaac mentioned, you can look at individuals. So this is what we kind of call like historical actors that had some influence in history, and some are more well known and others aren't as well known. So you provided the last example of someone who maybe traditionally hasn't been looked at in, maybe not mentioned in our history books, but someone that's still essential, important, and someone we can research and find out about and learn about their history. So
played a role in history, changing life as we know it today.
Yeah, and we think about those barriers that are broken, right? For the first, you said it was the first African American admitted to Harvard Medical School?
That's correct, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we're thinking about those barriers, and we've talked, not we, I should say per se, but there's been a lot of discussion throughout this past year and before that with dealing with issues of race and history and the importance of understanding the experiences of all groups in the United States, right? And so this is a good opportunity for us to learn more about the experience, the lived experiences of others, especially in a time that was much more restrictive isn't the right word, but there was numerous barriers, obviously, to admission. And even think about just as a student today trying to get into medical school, and now we're talking about during this earlier era in American history. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. I think I kind of screwed this up because I put room 3 and then I started typing. So I'm going to just go right over this and start with room 3 again. Sorry. And it's probably going to show up again, but let's do it right here. So room 3, we had Bree, Crystal, Diego, and Giovanni. Would you all mind sharing a couple of ideas that you had or topics that you discussed?
Yeah. Can I share for my group?
Sure.
Wait, who? I know Crystal talked too. She can go first if she wants to.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So the topic that I brought up was the Boston Tea Party. I chose that one because I think it's kind of funny how when I first learned about it, I was kind of like, tea, well, why is that a big deal? Because now we see a tea egg box, it's like $3. It's like worth $3. But back then, tea was like this huge brick. So when they did that, it was, I think it's a little bit funny, but it's not funny because they wasted a lot of their money actually when they dumped all that out.
So you were thinking about how we consume it today, and then thinking about the ways in which it was consumed in the past, and like the goals of what they were trying to do by that action.
Well, yeah, because when I was first learning about it, I was like, well, what's the big deal? It's just tea, because now it's worth almost nothing. But when I got more into it, I was like, okay, now I get it. Now I see the difference.
I think that's a really good point, because we think we use these commodities, right? Like coffee. I mean, Starbucks is like a global, corporation that's on every corner, and something that's consumed on a daily basis for a lot of people, sometimes 2 times a day for certain people, right? And tea as well. But these commodities in these earlier eras, especially like sugar, coffee, and tea, these were other spices. These drove exploration. One of the reasons why Christopher Columbus was sailing across the Atlantic Ocean was to try to reach India, to have a faster route to India, to expand trade. And he ran into the Americas, and it basically unleashed this whole global event of exploration of the Americas. And we know a lot of the history that happens after that. But that's a great point. I think Bria is thinking about like how we see it today, and that's one of the things I want you to consider, right? Is think about your own everyday experience, and then, wow, how was it back then? So thank you for sharing. Crystal, did you had something you wanted to add as well?
Oh yeah, let me just turn on my camera. Okay, so now that Brie mentioned the Boston Tea Party or whatever, wasn't the Tea Act part of, like, wasn't it during that time, or like what's it called? Sugar Act? Wasn't
Yeah.
like almost same time, like, right? Okay,
Yeah.
but yeah, I just wanted to chip that in. But besides that, I wrote down the Panic of 1837. I think it had to do with financial issues, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
It had to do with what's his face? Something Jackson, right?
Yeah, it has to do with the bank and Jackson, and arguments about the way in which the government and our financial institutions will work either simultaneously or separately, the role of those institutions. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of about debating about the future of the role of like the banks and our government.
Yeah, it's pretty much. I also wrote the Panic of 1819. I forgot what that was about, but 1837 is the one that stuck out to me the most.
And there's a lot of questions, if we're kind of fast forwarding today, questions about the role of the government, especially you saw with more recently the issue of COVID relief and money sent, and what role should the government play. You can kind of backtrack a little bit to different industries that have gotten assistance from the government for a number of different reasons. And in these earlier eras, it's a big question about to what role and what influence should the bank, should there be a national bank, among other questions that we'll kind of research and learn about as well. And yeah, I think those are excellent topics to research and find out more about. So we'll see, hopefully, if any of y'all are interested in using those as your essay topics. Thank you for sharing, Bree and Crystal, appreciate it.
Yep.
And the last group was room 4, and I'm gonna see if I can, here we go. I'm just gonna move it here. Sorry, I kind of messed up the flow here, but room 4, we had Charlie and we had William.
The Stamp Act. And the American Revolution.
Just with your discussion of those topics, did you see anything like the Stamp Act, and we can kind of fast forward to the American Revolution as being related, even going back to the Tea Party? Is anyone familiar with how those are like influential to sparking, I guess sparking is one way to put it, the revolution, like these different acts? How did they propel the colonists to move forward to seek independence? Is anybody familiar with that notion?
Oh no, it's at the top of my head. Oh no, wait.
I think it's just thinking about control and thinking about the way in which in this case, the colonial government was imposing control over the colonies, whether that's forcing them to purchase these stamps for documents or for correspondence, whether it's restricting their ability to purchase outside the colonial market. So one of the themes that we see, not only in the case of the English, but the Spanish and other colonial powers, is the restriction of their colonies in their ability to purchase outside the market. So if you're an English colonist, you have to buy this English tea, you have to buy this English imported sugar from this particular port, from this particular merchant. And so the reality of how that plays out on the ground varies, but a lot of times if I don't have to wait for something from an English merchant and a Dutch merchant or another group has it, or I can access it through Native American trade, or so to speak, there's other options to purchase. So there's this question of the ability to maintain that control, and the colonists eventually challenging some of that. And it varies from the English and Spanish, the Dutch, the French experience, but we'll see some overlapping similarities. So I think you all had some great suggestions that ran the gamut from like the later period with the early, with like room one, some of those examples, and then going back a little bit further. And then, you know, we can even backtrack there and go even further back in history, you know, with some other examples.
Can I add one?
Sure.
So this is a really big one, and it just popped in my head. But what about the Harriet Tubman in the Underground Railroad? That was a really big event before 1870.
Definitely, and that's one that you can research and take a look at, and someone that is of, you know, great historical significance, someone that there's going to be the advantage to researching someone like Harriet Tubman would be there's going to be a lot of source information, both secondary source information written by historians and primary source information, written documents written during the time of her experience. So you'll see the challenges that you might face for like more obscure topics. Like for instance, I had a student who wrote about fashion and talked about Native American fashion in comparison to like colonial fashion. And so she did a pretty good job, I think, but I feel like it was just based off of her, you know, correspondence with me, that it was a challenging topic to find, you know, some details and some other information. So if you do select something like that, you know, you're more than welcome to. It might just take a little bit more digging. We have a whole bunch of resources here at Southwestern College. You can meet with a librarian to talk about our essay. I'm going to see if they can come and visit one of our meetings and go over some options for your research. So that just kind of sparked a reminder for me that I got to check in with them. But thank you all for sharing. I think it was awesome to. This is for the Zoom meetings. This is the first time I've done breakout rooms, so I want to see how it went. So, you know, we'll definitely be doing more in the future with some different tools, different technologies that are going to help us access and view information in different ways. Just to wrap up with the breakout rooms, is there any last comments, questions about the topics that we are discussing for the essay? Does anyone else want to share either in our discussion or in chat? Okay, so what I'm going to do before, I'm going to stop share real quick. And before I let y'all go, what I'm going to do is show you one more thing, which is going to be the essay prompt, which is basically, you know, all the directions for the assignment. And there's a couple of last bits of information I need to update, but I just want to give you kind of this calendar. Giovanni asked, would the Mexican-American War be good? Yeah, that's a great option for your essay. The Mexican-American War takes place between 1846 and 1848, and some have argued that it's really a precursor to the Civil War. Prior to the Mexican-American War, we have the Texas Revolt for Independence, relating to the issue of slavery in Texas, which was not part of the U.S., it was part of Mexico. Once they gain independence, they're their own country, so to speak, and then they become annexed by the U.S. But one of the initial causes of that is the issue of slavery in Texas and the Mexican government's banning of slavery in 1829. So it's a great topic.
Actually, I was thinking I got one more. I know you want to wrap this up, but I got one
No,
more.
no worries.
So will the Turner movement count? And I'm talking about the one where like he told a bunch of people to tell them that like the slaves are coming to kill them all. Like there was a certain event where like, and so then the whites actually thought like, oh my gosh, all of them are coming. So it was like this huge thing where like a bunch of people just went and killing a lot of, no matter if they were a child or an adult, they would just keep. Does that
Yeah.
count?
Yeah, I mean, there's these, just to like piggyback off your example, there's these a number of different incidents where we see the attempts to quell what are believed to be slave revolts, and these happen in different ways, um, in different areas of the country, and you can definitely use those as examples of historical incidents that you could discuss in your essay if that was your focus. So let me share with you all the essay prompt. And I'm not going to read it all here. I'll post this up for you. It'll probably be tomorrow afternoon that I'll post this up, if not later on tonight. But what the thing I wanted just to share with you is taking a look at what the calendar is and the steps that you're going to take. And I'll just briefly go over this because I know we're kind of running out of time here for today. You'll have more time to look at it, and then for sure next week we can talk about it, and I'll post a video that talks a little bit more about the essay. There's a few steps that you're going to take. I've been mentioning these steps. The first is your essay topic. So today we had an opportunity to start getting the wheels turning and thinking about your essay topic. By week 3, I'll ask you to select that. So you have a couple weeks to consider your essay topic. I have week 6 and 7 here, but I think it's week 7 actually, and I believe I have it listed twice in the course calendar, so I got to update that for you all. But the annotated bibliography, so that's basically like a works cited page, and for each of your citations, you'll write a little paragraph blurb talking about the source. Your essay citations will be a list of direct quotes and paraphrase statements. That's dealing kind of with what we talked about earlier in today's Zoom meeting with ways that you can avoid plagiarism. And these will just be some examples of you using your sources and creating those citations. So it's kind of like a practice run for citing your work, your sources, and citing in your written work. The first draft I have, I think it's, let's see, let me double check and make sure the weeks are correct, but you'll have 75 points for the first draft, and then the second draft is 100 points. So if this all works out the way I want it to work out, like say there's a draft 2, but you still need to make some different, updates and adjustments for a regrade, then that would be like your draft 3 kind of final draft. I'm hoping to have enough time to where if I give you some feedback and say, hey, this is with these little corrections, you can improve your score by 10, 15, points, to give you that opportunity. All right. So kind of going back to some of the commentary earlier, we want to just continue working on developing our writing and research capabilities. So everyone's coming from a different background in regards to that. So, but yeah, I'll post up the essay prompt. Any questions that you have, just reach out, and then we can spend some time talking about this next week, and we'll have time to mull over it.
So you're gonna upload the History 1 first essay assignment on Sunday?
I'm gonna say by tomorrow. Let's just say by tomorrow, because I'm not sure if I'll have time. I got a couple other things to do this afternoon, and I have to make a couple of different edits to this, but it'll be up by tomorrow, Friday, and then you can take a look at it over the weekend. And then I'll also post up the link, so you could, if you already know your essay topic, you could submit it, and I can, if there's any questions, I can give you some feedback on it. If you're not sure, just send me a message and say, hey, Professor, I'm thinking about this topic, but I'm not sure if what do you think? And I'll be glad to respond. Can I answer any other questions or comments? I know this is going to be like something we're going to be talking about, so I'm sure you're thinking about it, but I just want to get you introduced to the assignment so that we can spend a lot of time this semester working on it. And you'll have time to, at your own pace, to work on it, I should say. All right, if anybody needs to stick around after and talk individually, I'm open to that, no worries, like for a couple of minutes. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up for the day. I just want to thank you all for joining us this week, and we'll have the same meeting time next week. I'll send out an event invite for the meeting, and if you're able to join, that's awesome. If not, I understand that the scheduling is a little off right now, and then by week 4, we'll be on the normal schedule.
Okay.
All right.
Have a
Bye,
good
everyone.
weekend.
Thank you. Same to you all. Have a great weekend. Thank you for joining. I appreciate you all, and see you all next week.
Bye.
Later, Professor.
Bye. Bye. Have a good day.
The meeting for next week, is it going to be Thursday at the same time? Or
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, it'll be Thursday at the same time. I didn't announce it previously, but I think just so you can try to see if you can make it or not, I'm just gonna set it at that for these first few weeks.
Okay.
And then from there we'll be at 10:10 for the rest of the semester.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Have a good one, Alexia.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.